Oh, it's great and awesome. We are at chapter 22, part 2, and the significant future. I will stop telling you which part it is because it's already up there. And I think if you are going to listen in the playlist, you only want to hear the books, not my commentary. If I err, you are obliged to or should text it in the comments that you want me to still be announcing which part it is I'm reading to you, so you don't get confused with the numbers and parts. And also, if you like my diddly daddly, doodly die. So, starting off with part 2. He turned the handle as he spoke, but the door did not yield. We threw ourselves against it. With a crash, it burst open, and we almost fell headlong into the room. The professor did actually fall, and I saw across him as he gathered himself up from hands and knees. What I saw appalled me. I felt my hair rise like bristles. Oh yeah, I forgot the gel. On the back of my neck, and my heart seemed to stand still. The moonlight was so bright that through the thick yellow blind the room was light enough to see. On the bed beside the window lay Jonathan Harker, his face flushed and breathing heavily as though in a stupor. Kneeling on the near edge of the bed, facing outwards, was the white-clad figure of his wife. By her side stood a tall, thin man, clad in black. His face was turned from us, but the instant we saw it, we all recognized the Count. In every way, even to the scar on his forehead. With his left hand he held both Mrs. Harker's hands, keeping them away with her arms at full tension. His right hand gripped her by the back of the neck, forcing her face down on his bosom. Her white nightdress was smeared with blood, and a thin stream trickled down the man's bare breast, which was shown by his torn open dress. The attitude of the two had a terrible resemblance to a child forcing a kitten's nose into a saucer of milk to compel it to drink. As we burst into the room, the Count turned his face, and the hellish look that I had heard described seemed to leap into it. His eyes flamed red with devilish passion. The great nostrils of the wide aquiline nose opened wide and quivered at the edges, and the white sharp teeth behind the full lips of the blood-dripping mouth jammed together like those of a wild beast. With a wrench which threw his victim back upon the bed, as though hurled from a height, he turned and sprang at us. But by this time the professor had gained his feet and was holding towards him the envelope which contained the sacred wafer. The Count suddenly stopped, just as poor Lucy had done outside the tomb, and cowered back. Further and further back he cowered as we, lifting our crucifixes, advanced. The moonlight suddenly failed as a great black cloud sailed across the sky, and when the gaslight sprang up under Quincy's match, we saw nothing but a faint vapor. This, as we looked, trailed under the door, which, with the recoil from its bursting open, had swung back to its old position. Van Helsing, Art and I moved forward to Mrs. Harker, who by this time had drawn her breath and with it had given a scream so wild, so ear-piercing, so despairing, that it seems to me now that it will ring in my ears till my dying day. For a few seconds she lay in her helpless attitude and disarray. Her face was ghastly with a pallor which was accentuated by the blood which smeared her lips and cheeks and chin. From her throat trickled a thin stream of blood. Her eyes were mad with terror. Then she put before her face her poor crushed hands, which bore on their whiteness the red mark of the Count's terrible grip, and from behind them came a low, desolate wail, which made the terrible scream seem only the quick expression of an endless grief. Then Helsing stepped forward and drew the coverlet gently over her body, whilst Art, after looking at her face for an instant, despairingly ran out of the room. Then Helsing whispered to me, "Jonathan is in a stupor such as we know the vampire can produce. We can do nothing with poor Madame Mina for a few moments till she recovers herself. I must wake her." He dipped the end of a towel in cold water and with it began to flick him on the face. His wife all the while holding her face between her hands and sobbing in a way that was heartbreaking to hear. I raised the blind and looked out of the window. There was much moonshine, and as I looked I could see Quincy Morris run across the lawn and hide himself in the shadow of a great yew tree. It puzzled me to think why he was doing this, but at the instant I heard Harker's quick exclamation as he woke to partial consciousness and turned to the bed. On his face, as there might well be, was a look of wild amazement. He seemed dazed for a few seconds, and then full consciousness seemed to burst upon him all at once, and he started up. His wife was aroused by the quick movement and turned to him with her arms stretched out, as though to embrace him. Instantly, however, she drew them in again and putting her elbows together, held her hands before her face and shuddered, till the bed beneath her shook. "In God's name, what does this mean?" Harker cried out. "Dr. Seward, Dr. Van Helsing, what is it? What has happened? What is wrong? Mina, dear, what is it? What does that blood mean? My God, has it come to this?" And raising himself to his knees, he beat his hands widely together. "Good God, help us! Help her! Oh, help her!" With a quick movement he jumped from bed and began to pull on his clothes, all the man in him awake at the need for instant exertion. "What has happened? Tell me about it," he cried without pausing. "Dr. Van Helsing, you love Mina. I know. Oh, do something to save her. I cannot have gone too far yet. Guard her while I look for him." His wife, through her terror and horror and distress, saw some sure danger to him. Instantly forgetting her own grief, she seized hold of him and cried out, "No, no, Jonathan, you must not leave me. I have suffered enough tonight, God knows, without the dread of his harming. You must stay with me. Stay with these friends who will watch over you." Her expression became frantic as she spoke, and as he yielded to her, she pulled him down, sitting on the bedside, and clung to him fiercely. Van Helsing and I tried to calm the both. The professor held up his little golden crucifix and said with wonderful calmness, "Do not fear, my dear. We are here, and whilst this is close to your, no foul thing can approach. You are safe for tonight, and we must be calm and take counsel together." She shuddered and was silent, holding down her head on her husband's breast. When she raised it, His white nightrobe was stained with blood, where her lips had touched, and where the thin, open wound in her neck had sent forth drops. The instant she saw it, she drew back with a low wail and whispered amidst choking sobs, "Unclean, unclean! I must touch him or kiss him no more. Oh, that it should be, that it is, I who am now his worst enemy, and whom he may have most cause to fear." To this he spoke out resolutely. "Nonsense, Mina. It is a shame to me to hear such a word. I would not hear it of you, and I shall not hear it from you. May God judge me by my deserts, and punish me with more bitter suffering than even this hour, if by any act or will of mine anything ever come between us." He put out his arms and folded her to his breast, and for a while she lay there sobbing. He looked at us over her bowed head with eyes that blinked damply above his quivering nostrils. His mouth was set as steel. After a while her sobs became less frequent and more faint, and then he said to me, speaking with a studied calmness which I felt tried his nervous power to the utmost, "And now, Dr. Seward, tell me about it. Too well I know the broad fact. Tell me all that has been." I told him exactly what had happened, and he listened with seeming impassiveness, but his nostrils twitched and his eyes blazed as I told how the ruthless hands of the Count had held his wife in that terrible and horrid position, with her mouth to the open wound in his breast. It interested me, even at that moment, to see that whilst the face of white, sad passion worked convulsively over the bowed head, their hands tenderly and lovingly stroked the ruffled hair. Just as I had finished, Quincy and Godalming knocked at the door. They entered in obedience to our summons. Then Helsing looked at me questioningly. I understood him to mean if we were to take advantage of their coming to divert, if possible, the thoughts of the unhappy husband and wife from each other and from themselves. So on my nodding quiescence to him, he asked them what they had seen or done, to which Lord Godalming answered, "I could not see him anywhere in the passage or in any of our rooms. I looked in the study, but though he had been there, he had gone. He had, however," he stopped suddenly, looking at the poor dropping figure on the bed, and Helsing said gravely, "Go on, friend Arthur. We want no more concealments. Our hope now is knowing all. Tell freely." So Art went on. He had been there, and though it could only have been for a few seconds, he made rare hay of the place. All the manuscript had been burned, and the below flames were flickering amongst the white ashes. The cylinders of your phonograph, too, were thrown on the fire, and the wax had helped the flames. Here I interrupted. "Thank God there's the other copy in the safe." His face lit for a moment, but fell again as he went on. I ran downstairs then, but could see no sign of him. I looked into Renfield's room, but there was no trace there, except... Again he paused. "Go on," said Harker hoarsely. So he bowed his head, and moistening his lips with his tongue, added, "Except that the poor fellow is dead." Mrs. Harker raised her head, looking from one to the other of us as she said solemnly, "God's will be done." I could not but feel that Art was keeping back something, but as I took it that it was with a purpose, I said nothing. When Helsing turned to Morris and asked, "And you, friend Quincy, have you any to tell?" "A little," he answered. "It may be much eventually, but at present I can say. I thought it well to know, if possible, where the Count would go when he left the house. I did not see him, but I saw that ray arise from Renfield's window and flap westward. I expected to see him in some shell go back to Carthage, but he evidently sought some other lair. He will not be back tonight, for the sky is reddening in the east, and the dawn is close. We must work tomorrow. He said the latter words through his shut teeth. For a space of perhaps a couple of minutes there was silence, and I could fancy that I could hear the sound of our hearts beating. Then Van Helsing said, placing his hand very tenderly on Mrs. Harker's head, "And now, Madam Mina, poor dear, dear Madam Mina, tell us exactly what happened. God knows that I do not want that you be pained, but it is need that we know all. For now more than ever has all work to be done quick and sharp and in deadly earnest. The day is close to us that must end all, if it may so be, and now is the chance that we may live and learn." The poor dear lady shivered, and I could see the tension of her nerves as she clasped her husband closer to her and bent her head lower and lower still on his breast. Then she raised her head proudly and held out one hand to Van Helsing, who took it in his and, after stooping and kissing it reverently, held it fast. The other hand was locked in that of her husband, who held his other arm thrown round her protectingly. After a pause in which she was evidently ordering her thoughts, she began. "I took the sleeping draught which you had so kindly given to me, but for a long time I did not act. I seemed to become more wakeful, and myriads of horrible fancies began to crowd in upon my mind, all of them connected with death and vampires, with blood and pain and trouble." Her husband involuntarily groaned as she turned to him and said lovingly, "Do not fret, dear. You must be brave and strong, and help me through the horrible task. If you only knew what an effort it is to me to tell of this fearful thing at all, you would understand how much I need your help." Well, I saw I must try to help the medicine do its work with my will, if it was to do me any good, so I resolutely set myself to sleep. Sure enough, sleep must soon have come to me, for I remembered no more. Jonathan, coming in, had not waked me, for he lay by my side when next I remember. There was in the room the same thin white mist that I had before noticed. But I forget now if you know of this. You will find it in my diary, which I shall show you later. I felt the same vague terror which had come to me before, and the same sense of some presence. I turned to wake Jonathan, but found that he slept so soundly that it seemed as if it was he who had taken the sleeping draught, and not I. I tried, but could not wake him. This caused me a great fear, and I looked around terrified. Then indeed my heart sank within me, beside the bed, as if he had stepped out of the mist, or rather as if the mist had turned into his figure, for it had entirely disappeared, stood a tall, thin man, all in black. I knew him at once from the descriptions of the others: the waxen face, the high aquiline nose, on which the light fell in a thin white line, the parted red lips, with the sharp white teeth showing between, and the red eyes that I had seemed to see in the sunset on the windows of St. Mary's Church in Whitby. At Whitby. I knew, too, the red scar on his forehead where Jonathan had struck him. For an instant my heart stood still, and I would have screamed out, only that I was paralyzed. In the pause he spoke in a sort of keen, cutting whisper, pointing as he spoke to Jonathan. Silence. If you make a sound, I shall take him and dash his brains out before your very eyes. I was appalled and was too bewildered to do or say anything. With a mocking smile he placed one hand upon my shoulder and, holding me tight, bared my throat with the other, saying as he did so, "First, a little refreshment to reward my exertions. You may as well be quiet. It is not the first time or the second that your veins have appeased my thirst." I was bewildered, and strangely enough, I did not want to hinder him. I suppose it is a part of the horrible curse that this happens when his touch is on his victim. And, oh, my God, pity me. He placed his reeking lips upon my throat. The husband groaned again. She clasped his hand harder and looked at him pityingly, as if he were the injured one, and went on. I felt my strength fading away, and I was in a half-swoon. How long this horrible thing lasted, I know not, but it seemed that a long time must have passed before he took his foul, awful, sneering mouth away. I saw it drip with the fresh blood. The remembrance seemed for a while to overpower her, and she dropped and would have sunk down but for her husband's sustaining arm. With a great effort she recovered herself and went on. Then he spoke to me mockingly. "And so you, like the others, would play your brains against mine. You would help these men to hunt me and frustrate me in my designs. You know now, and they know in part already, and will know in full before long what it is to cross my path. They should have kept their energies for use closer to home, whilst they played wits against me who command nations, and intrigued for them, and fought for them hundreds of years before they were born. I was countermining them, and you, their best beloved one, are now to me flesh of my flesh, blood of my blood, kin of my kin, my bountiful winepress for a while, and shall be later on my companion and my helper. You shall be avenged in turn, for not one of them but shall minister to your needs, but as yet you are to be punished for what you have done. You have aided in thwarting me. Now you shall come to my call. When my brain says, "Come," to you, you shall cross land or sea to do my bidding. And to that end with that he pulled open his shirt, and with his long sharp nails opened a vein in his breast. When the blood began to spurt out, he took my hands in one of his, holding them tight, and with the other seized my neck and pressed my mouth to the wound, so that I must either suffocate or swallow some of the... Oh my God, What have I done? What have I done to deserve such a fate? I who have tried to walk in meekness and righteousness all my days, God pity me. Look down on a poor soul in worse than mortal peril, and in mercy pity those to whom she is dear. Then she began to rub her lips as though to cleanse them from pollution. As she was telling her terrible story, the eastern sky began to quicken and everything became more and more clear. Akka was still and quiet, but over his face as the awful narrative went on, came a grey look which deepened and deepened in the morning light, till when the first red streak of the coming dawn shot up, the flesh stood darkly out against the whitening hair. We have arranged that one of us is to stay within call of the unhappy pair till we can meet together and arrange about taking action. Of this I am sure, the sun rises today on no more miserable house in all the great round of its daily course. Next time, chapter 22. How about you? Shoo-be-doo, and goodbye. I'm slow. I just ran a couple of rounds.